trying to bridge to the next session featuring Stephenie Andal, who is one of our best and brightest doctoral students here in these areas at the University of Sydney. She's engaged in research on questions of sovereignty and the relationship of sovereign power to the internet. And with apologies to George Orwell, one could say that her research raises basic questions about the control of digital media networks. And the Orwell formula might be that those who control the internet control the past, those who control the internet control the present, and those who control the internet control the future. And so this question of control, of power, of ownership, of the regulation, of structures of digital media turns out to be of fundamental importance. And the question is whether this has anything to do with Hong Kong. Stephenie, welcome.
Thank you, John. Well, that is the question indeed. Well, I do not have a PowerPoint presentation, so I'm feeling seriously deficient right now. But I will keep it short, and I'll try to keep your attention in my 15 minutes or so. I just want to say, though, that it's an absolute pleasure to be here this afternoon. I've already learned so much from all of our honored guests here, and I'm really looking forward to further discussion this afternoon and this evening. So in my next 10 or 15 minutes, I'm going to do a little bit of a left turn, as John hinted at, from the general mood of today's discussion. I want to present a sort of story, maybe a cautionary tale of sorts, about the potential future facing all of us. For there's a new power on the horizon, an innovative and unparalleled mechanism that has grave material consequences on our day-to-day lives, and that represents a devastating threat to the future of democracy. I am speaking of the relatively recent initiative of cyber sovereignty, and I'm going to present my take on the significance of Hong Kong for how it tells us about China's will to cyber sovereignty and the struggles that this is and could produce. And my paper today is a bald reminder of the utter centrality of digital communication technologies and the internet to the future of democracy in Hong Kong, as simultaneously avenues of resistance, but also as potential mechanisms aimed at the perfection of social, ideological, and political control. And while this paper may seem bleak and largely dystopian in outlook, ultimately my aim is to shed light on areas of political vulnerability within the Chinese polity, with the hopes of demonstrating that, quote, dominance, no matter how multidimensional, can never be complete, end quote. But first I'd like for us to take a step back and take a bird's eye view of the global reality we find ourselves situated in, by opening with a quote. A quantum shift in technological change is underway that makes the debate on metadata surveillance look antiquated. Consider that within 5 years, the human race will collectively generate more than 40 zettabytes of data per day. To get your head around this figure, try counting every grain of sand in the world and then multiply them 70-fold. We are moving from the surveillance state to the quantified society. Data mining, biometrics, predictive analytics, big data eugenics, the breathtaking fusion of the cloud, the unleashing of the WikiLeaks cables in 2010, the bloody clampdown on the citizens in the wake of the digital revolutions of the Arab Spring, and the Snowden revelations in 2013 that disclosed the ever-creeping tentacles of the surveillance state. Resistance festers and oozes from every possible crack: anonymous, encryption, the dark net, and the digitally enabled umbrella uprising. We have entered into an age of global unprecedented complexity, an era characterized by the unblinking, unrelenting, and uncensored exposure to systems and devices designed to monitor every aspect of human existence. And we find ourselves at a point in history where globalization has paradoxically strengthened and reshaped sovereignty and power of the state in new and perhaps unforeseen ways, where states today, both democratic and non-democratic, are now reconfiguring inflexible and decentralized new patterns of power. And as we move into a late age of the digital in the era of big data, Technologies are now increasingly employed by the state as mechanisms of power designed to permeate all aspects of biopolitical life and across sovereign territories through apparatus such as unrestrained surveillance, ideological control, and censorship. China's innovation in such techniques and measures is unparalleled, and Beijing's recent doctrine of cyber sovereignty, I would contend, represents a visionary expression of a new and insidious power mechanism that critically challenges conventional understandings of sovereign power. However, I also want to contend that Hong Kong's semi-autonomous status as a special autonomous region that is both inside and outside of the order of China represents a potential challenge to this manifestation of power. For such a designation has been premised on economic calculation alone at the expense of underestimating Hong Kong's steadfast and resilient political spirit. China's recently amped its rhetoric around cyber sovereignty, a policy that in a 2010 white paper stressed the principality of China's sovereign right to regulate the internet within its own borders. This state-centered approach to the global governance of the internet is feared to risk cyber balkanization, or the fragmentation of the internet into splintered groups carved up along existing geopolitical borders or by user interests. Such a model, an initiative also currently proposed by a number of like-minded regimes, is widely regarded to pose a threat to the continued existence of the free and open internet as it is configured at present, along with hamper the spread of worldwide political freedom. And this bold initiative should be viewed as both a continuation and also an augmentation of China's existing domestic political control measures that we are all familiar with, including its sophisticated online censorship apparatus, evocatively named the Great Firewall of China, its massive surveillance system, the Golden Shield Project, whose censorship methods include DNS, URL, and packet filtering, and DDoS attacks. A number of recent incidents also demonstrate Beijing's firm commitment to information control, such as the complete blockage of Google in December 2014, the shutdown of virtual private networks in January 2015, along with the growing repression of academic and ideological freedom. And last month's new draft national security law, which several people have raised here today, reiterated Beijing's aspirations for cyber sovereignty and its significance to China's broader security and development. This new draft, seen to be so wide-ranging that, quote, practically any aspect of life can be regarded as a matter of national security, end quote, also reasserted the threat that Hong Kong is perceived to pose to China's domestic security, reflective of Beijing's continued commitment to consolidating control over Hong Kong. So while on the surface, we could essentially see cyber sovereignty as a smokescreen of sorts for China to further its surveillance efforts over its citizens, I would contend that Chinese cyber sovereignty is much more than this, for it represents a new type of power, one whose state-of-the-art characteristics I would like to briefly sketch due to the implications that they could have on Hong Kong in the near future. First, cyber sovereignty exhibits a curiously schizophrenic character when it comes to efforts to legitimate itself. On one level, the terse tone of cyber sovereignty resembles a sort of throwback to older conceptions of an omnipotent state, but simultaneously it is often couched in a democratic and seductive language. One need only look at the new draft national security law that I just mentioned to see such cunning duplicity in action, where Beijing continues its bellicose bluster, warning Hong Kong citizens not to stir up too much trouble, while in the same breath going on to promise that measures such as cyber sovereignty will lead to the enhancement of life, along with guarantees of security and the combating of harm. And without granting too much credit to Beijing, we should not underestimate the shape-shifting potentials of a flexible China, who, as required, has cleverly co-opted the smooth democratic rhetoric favored today in a hyper-modern expression of the new 21st big democracy. In keeping with this, the latent aims of cyber sovereignty rest on a Foucauldian sense of sovereign power that negates the possibility of violence through calculated governance aimed at the political and economic optimization of its citizens. That is, it bears an uncanny resemblance to Foucault's governmentality, which pinpoints a historical shift in governing objectives from territory to population to omnipresent and subtle disciplinary methods that entail an often imperceptible dovetailing of both the freedom of the individual body and regulatory controls over the population. And if we see cyber sovereignty as a new technique aimed to enhance Beijing's dominion over ever more aspects of existence, we might recognize that this new disciplinary mechanism represents an immense and prefiguring power to shape people's lives in a very material sense. And this has disquieting implications for the reality of lives of everyday Chinese citizens, and also potentially for Hong Kong as well. And finally, cyber sovereignty should be viewed in light of Beijing's broader flexible approach to governing. A strategic move made by Beijing to more decentralized power structures in order to drive the new Chinese economy after the market reforms of 1978. Pierre Landry's surprising conclusion that China is, quote, one of the most decentralized countries in the world, if not the most, end quote, reveals a Beijing characterized not by a highly centralized bureaucracy, but rather as a flexible player that strategically intervenes and manipulates political situations as required. And while economic decentralization cannot be equated to political power, such flexible governance is regarded to follow in cyberspace, allowing for us to conceive of cyber sovereignty as a decentered yet pervasive power that fluidly contracts and expands as per shifting political and economic demands. However, this mechanism is yet incomplete, and in keeping with the hyperkinetic nature of technological change, is marked by immense contradiction, making it vulnerable to a number of tensions built into the Chinese polity itself. In light of this, China's new model of sovereignty has a major vulnerability, which I think is highlighted by the case of Hong Kong. Media coverage of the umbrella movement was heavily censored on the mainland, and in order to sidestep any potential internet shutdowns in Hong Kong, some protesters relied on off-the-grid technologies such as FireChat. The resulting digitally enabled network, characterized by geographical fragmentation, has arguably been seen as a small-scale example of cyber balkanization, and is demonstrative of the spirit of resistance that is often birthed in response to government repression. And rather ironically, Beijing, in an attempt to clamp down on information flows, itself played a major role in the creation of a separate digital network of resistance in Hong Kong that remained outside of the control of the state. In connection with this, Hong Kong's deregulated internet market operates independently from the Chinese mainland, whose internet service providers remain state-owned. Therefore, as presently configured, Beijing remains technically unable to encompass Hong Kong's virtual sphere, despite its status as a region of China. How then can China legitimate any sovereign claim over Hong Kong's internet, besides merely seeking a closer alignment, internet policy alignment with the territory? And the highly politicized Google incident in China in 2010 demonstrates the outside characteristic of Hong Kong's cyber framework from the mainland, in an early example of the problematic nature that Hong Kong poses to Beijing's assertions of domestic cyber sovereignty. And if we see the internet and other digital technologies as hybrid technologies whose emergent and elusive properties allow them to evade the complete sovereign jurisdiction of the state, this casts serious doubts on the success of Chinese aspirations for outright control over all of China's cybersphere. And as per the Google incident, Hong Kong's semi-autonomous status is simultaneously both inside and outside of the order of China, grants Hong Kong, more so than any other region of China, a unique ability to resist such consolidatory measures. And Hong Kong's historical economic exceptionalism also grants the region additional power, as a key component to the future of a China who, facing economic slowdown and corruption, relies on Hong Kong to continue its exceptional status as a conduit to global markets, and therefore must tread gingerly in any attempts at furthering control over Hong Kong. And the important technical reality of Hong Kong's separate internet architecture, coupled with the region's historical economic and political exceptionalism, allows for a new conception of how Hong Kong's very autonomy, demarcated by Beijing itself, presents it as separate from any totalizing ideological attempts, and constitutes it as a potential threat to Beijing's ambitions in cyberspace. So in closing, all of us are here today because the political dynamics of China have urgent ramifications on our day-to-day lives, broader aspirations for freedom, and the future of democracy not only in Hong Kong, but also globally. Beijing's doctrine of cyber sovereignty is representative of a wider drive beyond the surveillance state to the quantified society. And China's aspirations to assert this visionary model of sovereignty represent new and haunting possibilities of future modes of power. And I would like for all of us today to consider the very real ramifications of cyber sovereignty should Beijing attempt to impose it. So just in closing, I think that's enough for me. I just want to pose a few questions that maybe we can address later. First, considering that nationalistic internet regulatory models are highly undesirable economically, how can China continue to successfully straddle its aims in both economic growth and political control in light of its slowing economy and all of the other political challenges it faces? Is Beijing's stance on cyber sovereignty merely rhetorical? And while it's tempting to dismiss it, we should recall that Beijing has already established its technical ability and willingness to regulate its domestic cybersphere in a big way when China effectively shut off the internet in 2009 in certain regions of the country. And more recently, Beijing has moved to avoid reliance on foreign internet infrastructure, as demonstrated by the recent announcement of a new encrypted smartphone for its police force, created in collaboration with Alibaba. And if Beijing did have the power and legitimacy to actually institute this measure, how would Hong Kong factor in this? What would be the implication for Hong Kong's current and future informational and political freedom? And more broadly, and lastly, do we think that the further entrenchment of the surveillance state through such mechanisms could paradoxically be inflaming regionalism, risking balkanization, and the undoing of state power? How can the case of Hong Kong, as demonstrated by the umbrella movement and the subsequent fiery political spirit, illuminate this quandary? Thank you.
So we took a darker turn. There is a question here, just a couple, and very briefly, please say your name.
Thank you for that excellent analysis. My problem is that I think that it's too pessimistic, because I think what China is trying to do is to have its cake and eat it too. It's trying to have all the benefits of the internet, especially in relation to development of markets and neo-capitalism and so on, and also significant liberalisation of certain social norms within the population, all of which involves the internet, advertising and all the rest of it, while at the same time it's thinking that it's going to control the other aspects, the political aspects. And I believe that this, I agree with you, they're going to continue with this. In fact, I think they're going to get tougher with this. But can this possibly succeed, given that the internet, the international internet, is necessary, in a sense, for so much of what the Chinese are trying to do economically? It seems to me to be very difficult to say that this will succeed, even though I think that they will try. But that's just another indication, in my view, that the contradictions of China in its attempt to prevent democracy will become deeper, and the Chinese government will not be able to avoid democracy in the long term.
So Huawei is not in favour of Chinese cyber sovereignty because it wants to do business globally. And if it wants to do business globally, then it has to conform to global standards. Can you make it a question, please? Not a statement, a question. And a question here. Short, please.
One question for discussion and thinking about. When you're talking about the cyber sovereignty, you certainly the internet itself is global. So this creates contradiction and conflict. Keane is one of the Chinese journalists, how he was the persecuted and sentenced 10 years because Yahoo disclosed his information to the Chinese government. And then I was the one person to begin to push for his office to arrest Yahoo just released last year. So what I think is,
What's the question?
my question is, so what we can do, similar to this. For example, in here, many people are using WeChat. WeChat is just what you see. We are just the business, so I think customers of WeChat. And now, for example, 2 years ago, 2 days ago, the WeChat will ban lots of people for talking. So as customers, so what we can do on the trading for commercial or whatever outside China. So for the business, for the real end customers, and we plan to clear the bans on the service I use. So what you can do here? So that's what question we want to.
What's to be done?
My question is related to Mr. Xiaogang. So he's talking about the Chinese WeChat server block some freedom speech. I'm talking about the exclusion of privacy. He said that beside sovereignty. And all the overseas, I think the majority of the overseas Chinese are using WeChat as a communication. And I found out that when one of my relatives use WeChat, all my privacy has been copied, including all passwords, everything, including bank, credit, everything, being taken, including cloud. There's a functional GPS location, and you need everything to that. They use it for some purpose to control people. It's an exclusion of individual privacy, but in the Western countries, there's some rule. It's privacy, even for like health talk, some bodies they won't use this privacy. But the Chinese are using this privacy, obviously. And that's what I think I'm worried about. The overseas Chinese, they will have, will be much more controlled by the Chinese.
Stephenie, you're in the hot seat.
I am. Well, I mean, to the first question, I am quite pessimistic. I don't think that there's a lot that can be done. I think we're a little bit naive if we really think that we can overcome these systems. They're huge, they're entrenched, they've been around for as long as we can really imagine in different sorts of incarnations. So, I may be a little bit too dark that way. The only possible solution is really encryption. And that sort of speaks to what you're talking to as well, privacy. There is a move now. You're sort of illuminating this tension between openness and privacy. So encryption is the only answer, but encryption itself too is also leading to somewhat of a balkanization. When we encrypt, we are giving up the openness that we need and that we want, and we're limiting our own access to information and to knowledge. So even encryption itself is built in with something that is also a detriment to us in the future. So, that's not much of an answer for you, but to both of you, I would say that encryption is something we know that. But, there is a move more towards the issue of privacy. I'm sure you saw with Facebook the other day. They came out with a new measure that they're going to allow encrypted messages on Facebook, but you have to sort of sign up for it, so it's not just automatic. And, Google and Apple now have encrypted features on their platforms as well. So.
My question is, are there any countermeasures?
Encryption, I think, is the only countermeasure. But even that, we're giving something up.
I just think we can sue with each house.
You can sue.
Then I just want to touch
Who's gonna give the money? Who's going to sue?
Obviously, the US moves around.
I don't know a lot about the regulatory measures, and they are extensive and going across multiple national boundaries. That's something I need to explore at the next point of my research. It's slightly tangential to what I'm looking at, but it's certainly something that also needs to be addressed.
Okay. Thank you very much.